Arug land, which is, was, and always be First Nations land. The roundtable today will remind us of the genocide that took place in Gujarat in 2002. It'll discuss the struggles for justice, the impunity of the perpetrators, and the complicity of the state. It'll also explore how it relates to the impending genocide today and the way forward. We commence this session with a plenary address from Professor Greg Stanton, who is the founder of Genocide Watch and one of the world's leading experts in genocide studies. I hand this over to Professor Stanton.
Thank you very much, Haroon. It is a real honor for me to chair this conference and to really bring together people from around the world to discuss the serious threat to democracy and the threat of genocide in India today. A threat that has become very apparent. In December, of course, there was a huge meeting in Hardwar that actually called for genocide against Muslims, in which there was an open incitement to genocide. And that, in fact, follows after many other early warnings of this terrible, terrible problem in India. It is not a new problem. And this panel, in fact, will discuss some of those early warnings, including the 2002 massacres in Gujarat, over which the very same person presided in some ways. He was the chief minister of Gujarat and ordered his police not to intervene to stop the massacres. We also now have him as prime minister. So Mr. Modi, Narendra Modi, is at the center of this problem and yet has not even spoken out against the December calls for genocide. This conference, which will be convened by the Alliance Against Genocide, by Genocide Watch, by a large number of Indian, American, Indian, Australian, Indian, British, all around the world organizations who are concerned about this problem, will bring together experts on that, on the early warnings that we saw in Gujarat. We will commemorate, in fact, the deaths of the people who have already succumbed to genocidal violence in India. And we will also hear from experts on genocide prevention and what might be done in India and around the world to stop this current trend, to stop this early warning, to make it clear that we will not again allow genocide to happen. We used to say never again, and yet genocide has happened again and again since the beginning, since the Genocide Convention was signed in 1948. And yet we must not allow it to happen again in India. So I now turn it over to the people who will be speaking to us, especially this morning, about the Gujarat massacres.
Thank you, Professor Stanton. Like you rightly say, I think we have to thank you for creating awareness of the impending genocide in India, because the first step to solving a problem is being aware of it and speaking out against it internationally. And I think we're there already, and we have a very eminent panel of people who know what happened in Gujarat, with the curbside view from many fronts. And before we do that, we'll go to the speaking out internationally part. And what I might do, if that's okay, is play a statement of solidarity from Australian Senator Janet Rice, and then we'll go on to the panelists individually, if that's all right. So so just to give you a brief introduction of Senator Rice. Senator Rice is the Australian Greens spokesperson on foreign affairs. She's an environmentalist and a passionate advocate of human rights around the world, and she's one of the founding members of the Victorian Greens. This is Senator Rice's statement of solidarity for Indian Muslims and other persecuted sections of the Indian society. I'm just going to play that here, and I hope I get it right. uh,
Hello, I'm Senator Janet Rice, the Australian Greens spokesperson on foreign affairs, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country, which is, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. Over the past few weeks, young Muslim girls in India have been denied entry into their own school unless they take off their hijabs. And men clad in saffron have bullied and harassed hijabi young girls entering their schools, and Muslim students and teachers have been forced to take off their hijabs to be able to enter their schools. Across the country, in Gujarat, the ruling BJP's official verified Instagram account posted a caricature of Muslim men being hung en masse, reminiscent of an old German cartoon where Jewish people were similarly caricatured in the 1930s. Despite many calls from brave journalists and community activists, the Prime Minister and his government and party have refused to condemn this act. Journalist Rana Ayub, who does work globally to highlight atrocities against Muslim people in India, routinely receives coordinated rape and death threats in vast numbers by BJP's IT cell. And these are only incidents that have occurred in this month. India's recent past under the BJP government has been marked by religious segregation and violent Islamophobia. Since 2014, there have been heightened reports of communal hatred towards Muslim people, characterised by mob lynchings, by pogroms, and open calls for Muslim genocide. Genocide is not a standalone event. It's preceded by the systematic dehumanisation of a community for years, accompanied by attacks on education, silencing independent journalism, and stripping away of autonomy and freedom, which has been well underway in India for years. It pains my heart to see Muslim people in India experience this vitriol in their own homes. India is a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and Article 18 of this covenant states, everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right shall include freedom to have or adopt a religion or belief of their choice, and freedom, either individually or in community with others, and in public and private, to manifest their religion or belief in worship, observance, practice and teaching. And Article 20 of the same covenant states, any advocacy of national, racial or religious hatred that constitutes incitement to violence or discrimination, hostility or violence shall be prohibited by law. So in accordance with being a signatory to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, India guarantees her citizens civil rights and religious freedoms in the preamble of her own constitution of thought, belief, faith, expression and worship. In such light, the Indian government has a responsibility to protect its religious minorities from violence, hostility and hatred, which it has repeatedly failed to do. And despite calls for accountability, the Modi government has continued to turn a blind eye to the plight of ordinary Muslim people and enact policies that endanger the lives of India's vast Muslim community. All that is required for evil to triumph is for the good to do nothing. As Australians, we must stand up for Muslim people on the brink of genocide. In navigating our own economic and political relationships with the Indian government, we must highlight the rising concerns of human rights abuses being carried out by the country's government and ruling party and their Hindutva ideology. At the Australian Greens, we have a strong commitment towards peace and justice, and we are in solidarity with the pained Muslim community in India, alongside other religious minorities who are currently facing dehumanisation, violence, and fear of genocide. A country is nothing without its people. We ask the Australian government to bring up these human rights concerns with Indian leaders and to hold them accountable in the political and economic relationships between our two nations. We ask them to not just brazenly proceed with trade and defence arrangements without first considering the human rights context that this trade and these defence relationships are being undertaken in. It is imperative that Australia acts on this urgently and that we all stand up in love and solidarity with Muslim people in India. We see you and we will fight for you.
That was very powerful. Thank you, Senator Rice, for your very powerful and moving speech in solidarity with the Muslim people in India. We next move on to Tista Cecil Ward, who, as you know, is a renowned journalist, activist. She's also the Secretary of the Citizens of Justice and Peace, which is an organization that has represented the survivors of Gujarat 2002 in 68 cases, criminal, civil, and constitutional. As co-editor of Communalism Combat, a magazine that's being published from 1993 to 2012, before the genocidal carnage of 2002, she authored 5 cover stories on Gujarat from 1991 to 2001, pointing to the genocidal preparations in the state. As Secretary of the CJP, she is a co-petitioner with survivors in over a dozen cases related to carnage, including the famed Zakia Zafri case, where the attempt to remains to prosecute elected officials, administrators, and police officers for civil and criminal culpability. This has made a singular target for the present administration, first Gujarat government, now the government of India, and she has had 9 false criminal charges against her, each time strenuous efforts have been made to incarcerate her. Allow me to welcome Tista and to speak on our panel. Over to you, Tista.
Thank you so much, and co-panelists, and thank you so much to the organizers for organizing this extremely important event. Go straight to the point and speak about what do we mean when we talk about early warning signs, genocidal buildup, and the entire phenomenon of genocidal carnage of a particular community in the context of a democratic state ostensibly founded on the Constitution. This is the kind of tricky area that India represents today. Electorally, we are a proud democracy. We go to elections. In fact, elections are on in 5 states at the moment. But we see this peculiar phenomenon of electoral democracy throwing up majoritarianism and actual supremacist majoritarian parties sitting very comfortably within the electoral framework. This means that our constitutional institutions that are meant to check the supremacist impingement of majoritarianism on the most vulnerable minorities, marginalized sections, are simply not working. And I think this is what we need to examine in the context of India today. When we say early warning signs of a genocide, what do we mean? I will particularly deal with the experiences of Gujarat because, it bothers me that despite what this country has gone through, not just in the last 20 years since the genocidal carnage of 2002, but since that build-up in that Western Indian state where I hail from, where my ancestors hail from, and to which I have very, very intimate links, we saw a build-up, a strangulation of institutions of society and state before the 2002 carnage burst upon us. I recall those days when desperately one was addressing meetings across the country, human rights meetings, community meetings, feminist meetings, Muslim community gatherings, warning about what people in Gujarat, Muslims in Gujarat are going through. And I think the fact is that we were not alert enough to those early warning signs. We saw, for instance, as far back as 1991, insidious acts when Muslim communities tried to break out of the ghetto and move to more cosmopolitan areas in cities like Ahmedabad, Vadodara, Himmatnagar, etc. As the socio-economic profile improved, you saw their violent pushback by supremacist groups who said, no, this side of the city is saffron and you stay within your borders and stay within your limits. Hate speech and serious hate speech and hate crimes is what has actually typified the social and political atmosphere in Gujarat. I have unfortunately been gathering insidious pamphlets that have been circulated in the hundreds of thousands by organizations like the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, VHP, Vishwa Hindu Parishad, and the Bajrang Dal. And I recall one particular incident of 1998, the month of June and August, when an entire community of Muslims were pushed out of their village in Randikpur Sanjeli, which is within Gujarat, and in Panchmahal's district, which of course saw the Godhra incident 4 years later, and then the post-Godhra reprisal violence. And the pamphlets distributed there were onwards to Sanjeli, let's make sure that it's cleansed of the Muslim population. And for a whole 3 months, within a constitutionally elected framework, Muslims were not allowed to go back. It took a lot of initiative, a lot of sacrifice, a lot of economic loss for them to crawl back to their villages. And Randikpur Sanjeli is the same site of the violent gang rape of brave survivor Bilkis Banu in 2002, on March 1st, that took place. So we need to make deeper connections, we need to understand processes, and we need to detect early warning signs that are taking place. If we come to the Dharma Sunset that Dr. Gregory Stanton referred to, the Dharma Sunset of December 16 to 19 to 21st in the holy city, quote unquote, of Haridwar, where there was an open call given for a genocidal killing of Muslims. The man is out on bail now. You see at that time that the same person was using Facebook and social media to garner an entire support of hate-filled supporters right from 2017 and 18. My organization, CJP, has been closely engaged with trying to get Facebook and Twitter not to allow their platforms to be open to this kind of manipulation. We complained in 2018 about his use of his Facebook page to ask Hindus to arm themselves against Muslims. The reply we got from the platform was, if you don't like what he's saying, unfriend him. But we don't have any measures in place to actually ensure that Yati Narsinganan does not use a Facebook platform. So what we see is technology and social media today amplifying what printed pamphlets on the ground from the RSS Shakha used to do earlier. And technology is in a spiral. I was engaged in a press conference in mid-January where the whistleblowers from Facebook were trying to get the Facebook to release the human rights impact assessment report of what this social media is doing in terms of impacting extremely vulnerable communities. And we find there's a kind of a cohort between corporations who are making a lot of capital on the huge strength of their viewership and readership and usership within South Asia and India, and not being concerned about wanting to stop the algorithms of hate. In fact, my colleagues and I presented them with a list of recommendations, how they should invest more in languages, in the Indian languages, because the Roman script is being very cleverly manipulated to kind of engender hate. Coming back to Gujarat and the build-up. We must indeed, as Dr. Stanton said, begin with a humble, silent tribute to the survivors. What they saw happen to their near and dear ones was not simply death. It was mutilation of the worst kind. White chemical powder was used. I had the misfortune of seeing bodies reduced to nothingness, crumbling, a mass graveyard on March 2nd and March 4th. at Darya Khamni Gumbat, Ahmedabad, where 133 pieces of persons were attempted to be dignified in their white shrouds. There were 3 women whose stomachs had been slit open and the fetuses were hanging out. It was not simply a desire to kill, but to annihilate and to humiliate. And all of us keep repeating so that the bigots don't get to us, that when the Godhra mass arson took place at 7:57 a.m. on the 27th of February and 58 persons were burnt alive, there was widespread condemnation. There was widespread condemnation, even from the Muslim religious leadership, civil society, citizens groups. Nobody condoned that. Nobody knew who was responsible for it. But it was assumed and it was propagated that the Muslims of Signal Falia were responsible. It was widely condemned. And yet, the Godhra arson was not contained by the administration and the government. And as we progressed, and as we litigated, and as we investigated, and as we documented, horrific things came to light. Horrific things came to light. We have on our panel brave officers like Mr. R.B. Shikumar. We have others as well, like Mr. Rahul Sharma and others, who actually risked their services to bear witness to what happened. It's the first time I saw in my career as a journalist and activist that what we were seeing as activists was being echoed by the documents that were being provided by serving officers of the administration. And through the entire painful journey of investigation in the Zakia Jafri case, which I believe in independent India is a historic effort, because nowhere has a civil society legal rights initiative managed to galvanize such meticulous official evidence. State Intelligence Bureau records, police control room records, records of officers who are telling their superiors, please act, please contain the violence. There is a violent buildup, but there was a refusal. There was a refusal to act. I mentioned that a white chemical powder was used. I mentioned that in over 4 dozen sites of violence that I personally visited at great risk to my life at that time, no journalists moved out of the city of Ahmedabad and Baroda. We found everybody, the narrative was the same. Crowds were minimum 5,000, 15,000, 20,000. Impossible to galvanize without some sort of pre-planning. In villages, mobile phones were used. I remember the cost of a mobile call at that time was very expensive, 22 rupees a minute. I just got my mobile 6 months before the carnage. And yet the first day I recorded 183 calls on my mobile out of distress in different districts. Every criteria laid down in the 1948 Genocide Convention that India ratified in 1959, but has refused to legislate on, was met in Gujarat. Whether it was the intent to destroy in whole or in part a national, ethnical, racial or religious group, we know it was Muslims, killing or causing serious bodily or mental harm, deliberately intending to cause physical harm, Article 3, and where we have failed miserably is Article 4, which is prosecuting the perpetrators. I keep visiting back where how much, did we succeed? Did we fail? 68 cases we handled in terms of the Gujarat genocidal carnage. For the first time in the history of this country, we managed to get 170 convictions, 124 to life imprisonment. We did not ask for death penalty in the belief that we want reformative justice, not retributive justice. But what has the system given us, and what have our courts done? I remember April 2002 when we tried to get the Gujarat High Court to simply dignify the lives of people, 168,000 internally displaced persons who were living then in Gujarat's relief camps. And for 5 hours, the senior counsel from Mumbai had to argue to just get 5 rupees per head paid in time and 30 liters of water per person. The single most important part of the Gujarat carnage was not just the not just the fact that it happened on a government's watch and that senior officials, possibly the chief minister himself, was involved. We are litigating it, so I can't be more emphatic than that because it's in the process of prosecution. But the fact that there was every effort made to dehumanize the survivors, dehumanize the victim community, as if they did not exist, as if they had no right to exist within the Indian framework. And therefore, hate speech, I remember 5 or 7 or 8 very, very vitriolic hate pamphlets that one had gathered from the ground at that time. And whether it was Mr. Rahul Sharma, who was then Superintendent of Police, Bhavnagar, or whether it was Mr. R.V. Shrikumar, who then became, on 9th of April, Additional Director General of Police, Gandhinagar, some policemen were telling the Home Department and the government, prosecute these hate crimes, make sure the perpetrators are punished. But no, there was complete silence from the top. There was no desire to prosecute. And what we saw as we litigated or attempted to litigate the genocidal carnage, we filed cases of compensation, reparation, criminal trials, tried to build up a case of conspiracy, abetment, premeditation, all of that. What we saw is that one huge glimmer of hope came to us in 2004, April 12, 2004, when we got one judgment out of the Supreme Court. Before that, for 17 months, right up to July 2003, even the highest court, our constitutional court of the Supreme Court, was silent. Hate to say it, but the Gujarat High Court was compromised. And the only reason why the Supreme Court sort of was shaken out of its detachment, if you like, was when a star witness in the Best Bakery case actually spoke about how she had been intimidated on a public forum. And then began that journey of the Best Bakery case. Though within 3 months of the genocide, my organization had filed a major petition in the Supreme Court asking for transfer of major trials, asking for transfer of investigation. That case only got us the special investigation team in 2006. When we got the Best Bakery judgment in 2004, there was a glimmer of hope because that judgment for the first time actually spoke of the Nero's fiddling while Rome burned. And not only spoke about the state complicity, but also spoke about the destruction of evidence, the attempts to destroy legal evidence thereafter. They spoke about how the courts had become mute spectators, how the public prosecutor behaved as defense counsel, and how there was no attempt made by any wing of the state in Gujarat to prosecute the guilty. The case was transferred out of Gujarat to Maharashtra. And then suddenly, after that brief glimmer of hope that judgment gave us, the judgment itself did not lay down guidelines for the same guidelines to be followed in a host of other cases of 2002 and in further genocidal cases. Whether it is, as the cases mentioned, Muzaffarnagar 2013, the lynchings, over 77 of them post-2014, where Muslims largely and many Dalits have been the target in an India where the Gujarat model, if you like, has moved to Delhi. And therefore, it's been an extremely mixed experience. Hate speech, the othering of an entire marginalized community, has played a very specific role in targeted anti-minority violence, even before Gujarat, even outside of Gujarat. We saw it happen in Bombay 92-93. We've seen it in Hashimpura, Meerut, Malyana, the anti-Muslim violence of 87, Bhagalpur 89. We've seen it in Nelly, the massacre of over 3,000 Muslims, Bengali-speaking Muslims in the state of Assam on February 18, 1983. We've seen it in the massacre of the Sikhs in 1984 in the nation's capital after the assassination of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Hate speech and hate writing plays a very, very crucial role. And I believe when we move to the next stage of our deliberations about prevention, we need to really think about bringing in a public discourse on trying to educate large sections of our population, activists, lawyers, teachers, and doctors about the impact of deleterious impact of hate speech. This is something that we've been trying to do, and it's something which is not so easy to do because the kind of climate of fear that exists in India today, particularly because the kind of power that we see, political power today, whether we like it or not, in Delhi, in the central government, and in at least 16 states is today held by a party that is a parliamentary wing of an ideology that is itself supremacist and actually believes in overturning the constitution. I think this needs to be said, that the ideology of the RSS, the Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, that believes that the internal enemies of this nation are Muslims, Christians, and communists. And by communists, what they mean is any free thinker, any dissenter. I think that is the ideology that is ensuring a silence from senior political players who are holding constitutional positions, including those that are supposed to look after law and order and security. And therefore, we need to build up a movement, academic, activist, legal, and paralegal, on and around the serial impact of hate crimes and hate speech, I believe, is very, very critical. We need to address this not just in English and Hindi, but in multiple languages. This afternoon, we were analyzing a Kannada video, the same state where we see what is happening with young veiled Muslim girls, that somebody is there in Kannada on Facebook basically saying that we should make sure that for every Hindu's life lost, at least 10 Muslims are beheaded. This is a video that has just come out day before yesterday. So this kind of very insightful, not SIGHT, but CITFUL, insightful hate speech is something that we really need to build a movement around and understanding around, and explain to people that when we speak of hate speech and free speech, there are different things. This is something that has become a passion for our organization, because we have within India's constitutional framework, Article 19, which certainly gives us the freedom of speech and expression. And as activists and as believers and as writers, as constitutional activists, we would certainly not want any curb on free speech. But we need to tell people that if my free speech impinges on another person's right to live, right to life, and the right to life with dignity, which is Article 14 and Article 21 and Article 15 and Article 25, then there needs to be a balance struck. And we have laws in place in India, unlike the United States, we have laws in place in India which give the power to the authorities to prosecute that speech which actually can spill into violence. We have two major petitions and constitutional challenges in the Supreme Court at the moment, including one by a former judge that is asking for directions around hate speech. But I have become a little wary and weary of just expecting a magical wand from the Supreme Court. I mean, the Supreme Court, at the time of the Best Bakery case, was empowered under Article 142 to make sure that its directives are carried through, not just in the other Gujarat carnage cases, but in all such communal violence cases. However, we find that the orders of the court are often subverted by a state. And our experience saw that after that one glimmer of hope in the Best Bakery case, the other cases of the 9 trials handed over to the special investigation team appointed by the Supreme Court was extremely bitter. We found that the attempt was made in all those cases to whittle down the crimes, to dilute the crimes, to ensure that the courts treat the crimes as discrete criminal events that took place, murders that took place, not part of a larger whole which was pre-planned and premeditated. So conspiracy was ruled out at the investigation and prosecution stage. And one judgment, like for instance, the Best Bakery judgment from Mumbai, and the other one, the Naroda Patia judgment, which upheld the whole 120B of conspiracy very strongly, that has then been overturned by the High Court. And the minister who was convicted there has now been acquitted. So we've seen that whether it is the judicial system or the prosecutorial or the investigative arm, the inability or the lack of desire to recognize targeted genocidal crimes, where does it stem from? Does it stem from bias and prejudice? Does it stem from inertia and lethargy? Does it stem from complete callousness? That's a question we need to deal with and think about, because the fact remains that the Indian constitutional system, as we've known it and experienced it post-Gujarat 2002, has shown itself not equipped to deal with the intensity of the genocidal crimes, even those that came out of Gujarat. over 163 or 68, no, 245 cultural and religious places of worship were desecrated. It sounds, when you talk about lives, why do we talk about madrasas and dargahs and masjid? But I think it's very important because these are signs of a coexistence of a pluralist living and the right of the Muslim community in Gujarat to live with their religious and cultural symbols. A legal case was launched by the Islamic Relief Committee, and on 8th of February 2012, a very good order came out of the Gujarat High Court asking for the state to pay to bear the expenses of rebuilding the shrines. However, by the time the case reached the Supreme Court, the power equation had changed. Gujarat model had moved to Delhi, and you suddenly found a whittling down of that order. So whether it was the internally displaced persons in relief camps, whether it was the rebuilding of the masjids and dargahs and madrasas, whether it was standing back economically, because we, as Indians, we tend to undermine talking about the loss of property and business in Gujarat. Almost 4,000 crores rupees, 4,000 crores worth of property was destroyed. This has been documented by the Women's Parliamentary Committee at great length, apart from the National Human Rights Commission and the Chief Election Commission. It has been documented by quasi-official bodies, and yet the reparation or compensation has not only not been paid by the state, but there's a clear-cut, contemptuous attempt to try and show that not much really happened. Whatever happened was heinous in Godhra, but what happened was post-Godhra was just some stray incidents of violence that took place. I'd just like to, the last few minutes, take up by just describing to you what exactly has been our experience. First, with the Concerned Citizens Tribunal, which I had the privilege of being convener to, Justice Krishna Iyer, Justice P.B. Sawant, and Justice Hospital Suresh, apart from Aruna Roy, K.G. Kannabiran, Ghanshyam Bhai Shah, and others were the panel members. And I would urge all the experts who are here to please go through that report. It still remains relevant today. It's called Concerned Citizens Tribunal, Crimes Against Humanity. Please go through the findings on Godhra. Please go through the short-term and long-term recommendations. Please go through the findings on the state government and the central government. I feel they have actually encompassed all that we are talking about today, because they have actually pinpointed who was the chief architect of the genocidal crime. They have talked about how even Godhra was completely manipulated. So you had this crime bursting upon the nation's psyche around 8 a.m. on the 27th morning, when you have a lot of political actors moving to the city of Godhra. And by 2 p.m. that afternoon, which is tomorrow 20 years, you find a decision being taken, which has not been properly probed, which we are trying to push in the Satya Jafri case, which is that, yes, the bodies should be allowed to go to Ahmedabad. Why? Why should the bodies be allowed to go to Ahmedabad in a motor cavalcade? And then the State Intelligence Bureau's messages that we have unearthed, and the police control room messages show us that by the afternoon of the 27th, almost by 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock, attacks had begun on minorities. Whether it's Baroda, whether it's Khed Brahma, whether it's Palanpur, whether it's Sesar, variety of districts, the attacks had started. Curfew is not imposed, despite these attacks beginning. Ahmedabad city itself, curfew is imposed only at 1 p.m. the next morning, when you already have had 14 first information reports registered by the police themselves on the 27th itself, including 2 deaths. So it was very carefully crafted. It was very carefully planned. And on when the cavalcade left, and let's not forget what happened, the bodies of the Godhra, unfortunate Godhra victims, those who were not living around, some of the bodies were allowed and were given to a VHP person. They were not given to an official person. They were given to a Jaideep Patel, who was a secretary of the VHP Gujarat, to take to Ahmedabad. This is unheard of, that actually the corpses of such a huge tragedy should be given to an organization that is well known as making insightful statements and making inflammatory attacks on the minorities. And then they reach, at 3 a.m., they reach Sola Civil Hospital on February 28th. And when they reach at 3 a.m. or 4 a.m. on the 28th, there already is a crowd of 4,000 RSS persons waiting there. How was the message sent? Who sent the message? Why was it allowed to be sent? All this is part of the Zakia Jafri case record. And this is not coming from Tisa Setalvad or R.B. Shivkumar. It's coming from the police control room messages that are part of the SIT investigation papers. And yet, they were not investigated properly. I mean, I could go on and on just to show how nugget by nugget, district by district, there was evidence which was ignored by the courts, and it was possible to make a case out for larger criminal conspiracy and abetment. And yet, our courts have chosen to treat them as discrete, separate crimes, not even applying the section of 120B, which is criminal conspiracy, which just means conspiracy. It does not even mean what we mean under the Genocide Convention. So many questions are thrown up. How resilient is the Indian system? I would say the Indian system, large sections of our democratic institutions have been hollowed out. The constitutionalism that we expect from our police, from our prosecutors, from our administrators, and even the response we expect from our courts is very, very lacking. Courts might be just delayed, but when it comes to the police and the administrators, we have been talking about brazen communal bias, anti-minority bias in the police force, which is echoed in the reports of the National Police Commissions in the 1980s. And I think, therefore, unless India is first prepared to look these developments in the eye, look these corrosions in the eye, and admit that that this hollowing out has taken place, we will not be able to ignore a repeat. We are not talking about early warnings anymore. I'd just like to end by saying, we're not talking about early warnings anymore. We are talking about multiple warnings that have led to multiple large or mini genocidal carnages. And unless we are able to really learn and put our heads together after what we've experienced pre-2002, post-2002, and now with the government in power at the center, which was also in power in the state of Gujarat in 2002, we will not be able to, we won't be able to confront this. I'll end by just narrating one incident which shook me deeply because it revealed to me the depth of the kind of hatred that has been allowed to sit among people in Gujarat, ordinary people. 1991, long time back, I was a special correspondent in one of India's top business magazines called Business India. And violence had broken out vis-a-vis the Rath Yatra, which is around July every year. And I had the mandate to travel by bus and train across the state of Gujarat and unravel what kind of systemic changes were happening. Why was this constant repeat of this violence taking place? Of course, I did 3 reports and all of that, but I remember one incident from Narangpura. Narangpura is a posh area in the city of Ahmedabad. And there was this gentleman, Mr. Khan, who had moved out from the old city area to live there as his economic situation improved. And in the midst of the Rath Yatra related violence, 2 buxom Gujarati women actually shoved him to his death from the 2nd floor of the building. I was just chilled by that episode like no other. And of course, one reported on it, got the FIR, wrote about it. And I've been constantly speaking about that one incident because what does it make 2 women in a housing colony do this to another human being? And when I was narrating this as part of my book release function in 2017, several years later in the city of Nagpur, a young man walks up to me in a shattered way. He was the Times of India correspondent then in 2017, and he was an 11-year-old when this incident took place in the city of Ahmedabad. And he said, ma'am, you know, the incident that you spoke about, there's an ending to it which you don't know. And I said, please tell me. He said, the women who actually did this to Mr. Khan were actually felicitated during the festival of Navratri, which is the dance festival before Dasara. And I think that is what we are grappling with in India today. It's not simply what the state is doing or what a certain section is doing, but the hatred that has permeated large sections of our public sphere. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Tisaji. I mean, you bring up very pertinent points. Something that strikes me, and I think it is about hate speech, and it's something that, you know, we'll be very interested in a comment on from the experts here. We know Ahmadiyya always says that we've been saying never again, but it's been happening over and over again. We also say that each time the genocide occurs, there is hate speech that precedes it. Then why shouldn't we call hate speech a crime against humanity? Why do we need to wait for the genocide to occur to call it a crime against humanity? Is that something that we think about? I'll just leave it out there, and we'll move on to the next speaker, Mr. Prem Shankar Jha. I think the other thing Tisa ji raised about was where this all started, and was it really legit? And I think Prem Shankar Jha ji has some really interesting insights on that. A brief introduction. Prem Shankar Jha ji is one of India's best known public commentators and a veteran journalist. He is a former media advisor to the then Prime Minister of India, Mr. VP Singh. Over to you, Shankar Jha ji, and thank you. You're on mute. You're on mute. Thank you,
Harun. And thank you for correcting me. I always leave that new mute button on to the last possible second. May I just start by saying, making one disclaimer, point of disagreement. India is not on the brink of genocide. Let me be very, very clear. What India is on the brink of is losing the essence, losing its soul, which is pluralism, tolerance, multiculturalism, and out of it, a democracy which is in fact pluralistic, highly pluralistic, and secular in the sense of accepting all religions. That acceptance is vanishing. We are not going towards genocide, but what we will, if present trends of this government continue, where we'll probably go, if it is, we will see a breakup of India. Don't forget that the BJP has a strong hold in only 5 states out of 31 in India. And that beyond a point, if they push the kind of anti-Muslim, in fact, all kinds of minorities, including very frequently Dalits on the ground. They don't admit it, but it happens. Policies, if they do that, then we will in fact find that a large part of India will just break away and say we don't want to be part of this country. That's my fear, and therefore I'm going to start there. All of this began with the burning of the bogie number S6 of the Sabarmati Express in Godhra on the 27th of February 2002. And what I want to concentrate on just now, and I'll do it as briefly as possible because I want this to have as much time as possible, is to point out that the very basis on which the sort of self-righteousness of the Hindutva majority has been built in the last 20-25 years is utterly false. There was no communal setting fire to the Sabarmati Express. It was an accident. I intend to show you that. And second, more important, 58 people were burnt to death, but only a small number of them were Karsevaks. If that, but I cannot say how many, but I can tell you those who are not Karsevaks, and I shall go on in a few moments to do precisely that. And I leave it to your good sense to decide whether I'm right or wrong. As you all know, this thing happened at Signal Falia, 1 kilometer outside, 1 kilometer, 1 mile outside Godhra station at 7:30 in the morning on February 27th. And by the afternoon, the Gujarati press had jumped to the conclusion that it had been done by a large number of Muslims who are of a particular caste called the Ghanchis, and who had a slum colony, which is right beside the Signal Falia and the train had been brought to a stop, to a halt there, and that then windows were broken. Forgive me, let me put off this phone of mine. I didn't realize it was on. Just give me a moment, sorry. Okay, it's done. Oh, sorry. I apologize for that, all of you. This happened at that point. Now, what I want to tell you, first of all, is, I got this disturbed, is that this was, by the afternoon press of that day, the Gujarati press, this was done by the Muslims. This was confirmed by the Central Forensic Laboratory in Ahmedabad, under its assistant director, a man called M.S. Dahiya, in a report on March the 9th, in which he said that the report said that the windows had been broken, kerosene-soaked rags had been thrown in and set fire to, etc., and that this was how the bogie had been set on fire. This belief was, and when the train came, you had 58 car sevaks who were all dead. The train was the train full of car sevaks, and Tista has just described to you what was done, how this was turned into a parade. Now, first, let me tell you who all were on the train. The train started in Lucknow, and it started with a total number of, I've got the number here. There were 43 booked passengers on this. The bogie was capable of carrying 72. There were 43 booked passengers, of whom 20 were men, 19 were female, and 5 were children. I've gone through the entire list, and there are only 2 or 3 people who were single people. The rest were all families. These were families traveling together. Along the way, another 23 passengers entered this bogie, so that there were in all about 66 people in the bogie when it came to Ayodhya, where it was invaded by car sevaks. And at a certain point, definitely there was a minimum of 103, possibly more, as many as 150, stuffed into that bogie when it got to Godhra. In Godhra, the report that was given was, as I told you, that there was this. It was stopped outside. There had been trouble before, and this is, between the car sevaks and the Muslim tea vendors and so on, and the girl had been molested and so on and so forth. But in fact, none of that is true. There may have been trouble. There was trouble always. Whenever there was a group of car sevaks, or any group, for example, there have been other groups of people who behave very badly at train stations. This is not an unusual thing. But what happened here was that in the report that the Central Forensic Laboratory said, it confirmed that this had been done. And that was picked up by Wikipedia and everyone. Until today, you find Wikipedia calling that the start of the problems in the direct cause of what happened in Ahmedabad afterwards and in the rest of Gujarat. That was on March the 9th. This report was Gujarati paper report was confirmed on March the 9th by the Central Forensic Laboratory, and so it seemed that it was absolutely clear that this is what had happened. Then the first thing that we have to see, which comes as a great surprise, is that there's a second report by the same institution, the Central Forensic Laboratory, on May 1st. And that report says that everything we have said before is wrong. The train was on a bund at Signal Failure, about 15 feet up. And it was very difficult to throw anything in. We tried to throw kerosene into the water, through the windows, and only 15% of the water fell in. If kerosene had been tried, and it would have caught flaming rags and kerosene had been thrown, and there was a fire in the train, there would have been fire all along the outside of the train. The outside of the train has not been burnt. So the same institution under the same mandaya gives a second report, completely denying the first report. Why was this? Because at that point in time, the Concerned Citizens Tribunal had said that they wanted to go and see what had happened to the bogie itself, which is on some siding in Ahmedabad. And so a second thing had to be done. But that report, having said that the first is wrong, went on to say the real way that it was done was that some Muslims opened the doors, got onto the train, carrying buckets with 60 liters of kerosene, poured it into the compartment and set fire to it. But there's one small problem with this idea. They then said that we tried this with water, and the water went all the way to the other side of the almost to the end of the bogie, about 80 feet in. There's only one small problem with this. They did this test with an empty compartment. Whereas in this compartment, there were at least 103 and up to 150 people at that time. Their feet would have been in the way, their luggage would have been in the way. How would 3 buckets, assuming that that Muslims could get 3 open buckets full of kerosene onto the train in the first place, in a train full of car sevaks? Can you imagine the car sevaks allowing anyone to get in with that way? And Muslims at that, but then you pour that thing. How does it get past the luggage? How did it get past the people's feet? Why were nobody's feet burnt? There are two people have gave evidence to the commission, the Nanavati Commission, both government servants, one of the railways and one a policeman, saying that one of them was in the compartment. He managed to survive, but did he survive or die? I'm not quite sure. It doesn't matter. He died of smoke, not of fire, because there was smoke in the train and he was trying to crawl out. How do you crawl out if there is flames on the floor of the compartment? This is a complete nonsense report, the second report. There's only one common feature in both these reports by the Central Forensic Laboratory. It is that the Muslims were responsible. That is the only common feature in this. Now if we come to see who actually was killed, you find that there were 58 or 59, there's some dispute about this figure. I'm going to go with 59. 59 people were killed, of whom 22 were men, 27 were women, and 10 were children. Now tell me something. Would the 10 children and the 27 women have been car sevaks? Or would they have been members of the families? And would the men who were killed be people who had decided not to stay with their families to the end, rather than desert them and go out? There were also about 45 people who were injured, and they got out from both ends. Now, if the train is packed and the car sevaks have come in at the end, in Ayodhya, whereas the train came from Lucknow, then they would be closest to the doors. They would be the first to go out. They were also the youngest and fittest of the people there. And they would have been overwhelmingly male, if not entirely male. And they would have got out. In fact, 5 people were treated for hand burns only among those who had been injured. So the entire thing was completely cooked up. The story was cooked up, but this was an accident. In 2005, the UC Banerjee Committee went into this in great detail. It set up a 5-man experts committee. One of the experts talked to me personally and told me exactly what they found. And I will tell you what it was. They said, in order to find out how this bogie had caught fire, whether it was from outside or inside, we examined 5 burnt out bogies that were kept in the central railway yards in Delhi as for forensic purposes. And one of the 5 had a burn and smoke pattern, which was identical to the one in bogie S6 of the Sabarmati Express. And that burn, that thing started at the center of the fire that started it was at the center of the bogie. And the way it probably started, I strongly suspect, is because it was 7:30 in the morning. A lot of people, particularly Hindus, caste Hindus, will not take anything from outside. Someone was cooking something, maybe just a cup of tea. And because of the crowding, it got pushed over. It got pushed over, and it started the fire. If you remember, none of the materials in second-class compartments in those days was flame retardant. I am 83 years old. I remember all this very well. Most of you are much younger. For you, it's something that's happened in history. For me, it's something that happened, out of a long, already after a long experience in life. And so I can tell you quite firmly that this was an accident. And the tragedy is that accident was used so well by the Sangh Parivar to launch themselves into power and now threaten our democracy as a whole. That to me is a tragedy. But please let me say one thing. Democracy is still functioning. There are elections taking place now. And we do not know what will happen in these elections. We know even less what will happen in 2024. Don't give up hope on democracy. And please, we are a very, very long way away from genocide. I don't like the word. I would like you not to overuse the word, because it will lose its value if you do so. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your insights, Prem Singh Kajaji. That was very insightful, and it brings to light a lot of inconsistencies in the whole narrative of the Gujarat pogrom, on how it started, and where it went. And our next speaker will provide a lot more insight into that. And if I may introduce him, he's Mr. Abhi Kumar. He is the former Additional Director General of Police in Gujarat. Between the years 2000 and 2002, Shri Kumarji served in various roles as the Additional Director General of Police of Armed Units, Intelligence, until he retired in 2007 as Additional DGP of Police Reforms without any specific assignment. He's authored 3 books in Malayalam and 1 in English. The revised edition of the English book was published in June 2021, captioned Gujarat Behind the Curtain by Pharos Media Publishing Private Limited. Please do check it out. It provides really good insights. He's also authored several articles. In 2012, in addition to those articles, he made a representation to the governor seeking an investigation of the genocidal crimes in Gujarat. Next, I'd like to invite, earlier today when I spoke to Mr. Shri Kumar, he talked about other inconsistencies on how there were differences and failure to follow procedures that contributed to the pogrom. And so to provide more insight into that, let me invite former Additional DGP Abhi Kumar to provide his perspectives on the Gujarat program. Over to you, sir. You're on mute. You're on mute, Shri Kumar ji. Up, mute में है. You have to unmute yourself. नहीं, we can't hear you.
Now, can you?
Now we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay. I was given the very important assignment by the government on 9th April 2002. By that time, major part of riots were almost over. Because probably they were considering that they should have a officer with the experience in the intelligence section. I was only officer at the higher level with the experience of almost 15 years serving in the intelligence bureau. So actually, when the real riots, the Buddha incident and riots took place, I was additional DGP in charge of armed units. About 14 battalions of armed battalions are there. I was in charge of that. And at that time, I was traveling from Ahmedabad to Gandhinagar is my office, and especially on 28th was the birthday. I was passing through the main road. I found in a congregation of people gathered together and trying to close down shops and even threatening shopkeepers who were not closing down, and they were trying to burn the racks and tires, etc. Then I stopped at a particular static point, what we call static point of police post. Then I asked them, why you are remaining quiet, because this is openly they are violating in the road. This is happening. Then they said that, sir, there are no audits. Our audits are not remain quiet and watch the show. So this was the beginning of the whole intensification of riots. In the reason being that the crowd is also very careful. Crowd will first test through minor acts of violence the mood of the police. If the police is remaining quiet, crowd will aggravate the violence. That this happened. By the time I returned by evening from Gandhinagar office to my residence in Ahmedabad, I found many colonies, many houses were burned, and people moving with half-burnt bodies, etc., etc. This has really moved me. And what I have done, I had no way to write to anybody. I had some kind of a contact with the office of the President of India. I have written an anonymous note to President of India, and I have sent the copies of those anonymous notes to almost 14 senior political leaders, including the opposition leaders, etc., etc., and narrating the whole this thing. And subsequently, the police, the staff in the Dr. Narayan's office told me that this matter has been used by President to write letters to the Prime Minister for initiating action. And as a related matter is, subsequently, I have approached Justice Nana of the Commission to approach the President's office and get the copy of this letter, but no action was taken. So, and now I narrate the what action I have taken as a constitutional functionary and as additional DGP Intelligence, who is the main reporter of communal developments, all law and order situation related developments to the government, that is the Chief Minister, the Home Secretary, Chief Secretary, etc. On taking over the charge, I found that no reports about the involvement of Sangh Parivar or their front organizations in the riots have been sent by from my office for obvious reasons. So then when I called the staff said that our instructions are not to send such reports which will annoy the BJP government's agenda or policy, because this was part of the policy to go against the minority interest or cause maximum atrocities to minorities. So then I have studied those reports and sent a wrap-up report of about 10 pages. On 24th April 2002, I have taken charge of the Officer of Additional DGP on 9th April 2002, and 24th April I have sent a total assessment report, which is the duty of the topmost intelligence officer to send such a wrap-up report. There I have clearly mentioned that the Muslims are under the impression that their affairs are not being registered. When they are going for getting their affairs registered, the police officer in charge of the police station, in charge of the SHO, he himself volunteering and registering the case on the pretext that he was present at that time. As a result, they put their own language, and these problems were there, and the names of the Hindu leaders who were organizing the massacre, these were avoided, and so many such about almost 18 to 20 such specific complaints were there, and which I have listed out and sent in that 24th April report to the Personal Secretary to CM, Additional Chief Secretary Home, DGP, and concerned officers in the field, etc. So these I have been called by the Minister himself within a week and said that how you are sending this report? This is not our information. This was his version was that the reaction of the Hindu crowds against the Muslims were a natural reaction. It was more or less like a operation of Newton's law. That Chief Minister himself was mentioned this thing in one of the press statements, etc. But then I said that that is not the case. There are more casualties among the Muslims. I quoted the figures and specifically told them that you are misled and you are having wrong ideas, and he did not agree. And the difference of opinion between the Chief Minister's perception and my understanding, it started then onwards, and subsequently I have sent numerous reports about the specific violence being carried out in certain areas of the Ahmedabad city, Baroda city, Sabarkanda, and other areas where the organized, planned, mobilized violence was happening with the total connivance and organization of the officers. Then the long and the gist of the whole assessment report was that I mentioned that this massacre has occurred. This mass crimes or genocidal crimes have occurred because of the convergence of 5 categories of criminal groups. Normally, criminologists all over the world, they accept that major massacres will occur only with the convergence of 5 categories of criminals. These 5 categories of criminals, in the functional way speak out, they are the planners. Planners were the top Sangha Parivar leadership and the political executive running the state. That is, who are all the people, name ways, you know that. They organized on 27th evening, some of the senior people were missing for some time, and they organized it. Secondly, they planned it. I mean, first point is planner. Second is organizer. Organizers are the people who are field level, district level leaders of Sangha Parivar, BHP particularly, and RSS also. Third group was the mobilizers, people who mobilized resources. There was a shortage of cooking gas because this gas has been taken away by these people for using it for causing extreme arson in the houses and also in the flats, etc. That was the third category. Fourth category was the facilitators. These are the most important people. These facilitators were the people who enabled the commission of crimes, who were almost enablers of the crimes, and last was the perpetrators, actually people who indulged in violent crimes. Of this, very interestingly, this the facilitators, nobody has taken any action against the facilitators, and to some extent, to greater extent, the mobilizers, the organizers, and definitely planners. Among the organizer come mobilizers, only in Naroda Party case, very good judgment has come. 96 people were killed during the supposed during the actual curfew time, because curfew was not enforced at all. There was not a arrest under 188 IPC section for violation of curfew, and that only facilitated such a situation. This has actually created some kind of a very adverse poster against me by the seniors, the DGP reports, and they said that you have to stop sending such reports. You can't send such reports, and you have to change the tone of the report. Then I told DGP, sir, you give me specific audits that you need not have to send the periodical assessment reports, because that is provided in the police manual rule number so and so. So subsequently, he did not give any instruction. By that time, the Justice Danavadi Commission was constituted, and I was asked to submit affidavit just based on the records available in the Intelligence Bureau, that means State Intelligence Bureau. And in the State Intelligence Bureau, interesting fact was that up to my taking over on 9th April 2002, there were no reports against the Sangha Parivar or their role in planning, etc., etc. So I have to depend upon the reports which have shown that the rightful action was taken by the police authorities in all areas of extreme violence. And in one of the assessment reports, I also mentioned that actually the propaganda spread by this Sangha Parivar is that this was a spontaneous reaction of the Hindu crowd, Hindu mobs, who were extremely annoyed with the killing of 59 Garsevaks is totally wrong, because at that time in Gujarat, there were 30 police administrative units. Police administrative units may be slightly different in some places with the revenue administrative units, and there were 4 commissionerates, that is Ahmedabad, Surat, Vadodara, and Rajkot, and 26 districts. Of these things, the 2 commissionerates and about 9 districts only extreme violence have taken place. That is because the main reason is I brought out with the graphic details, the specific details on the ground I gathered from our own people, that in these places, the standard operating procedure to be followed, structurally followed, as per the directions of the communal rights scheme, as per the directions of the Gujarat Police Manual directions, were not carried out at all. It was a deliberate connivance, and this is the role of the facilitators. And I initially, in the affidavit I have sent, actually in the second affidavit, I have submitted actually 9 affidavits. Out of that, 4 were in service, and rest after my demitting office of the additional DGP intelligence, but before the retirement. There I mentioned that these people, I have requested, I was mentioning that, Justice Nanavati, I requested that why in 11 districts, out of the backup is like that, 11 districts, there was absolutely no violence, including a major city, that is the second most populous city of Gujarat, that is Surat. The violence was only 2 people were killed or something like that, because extreme rightful action carrying out the operational procedures was done by the then Commissioner of Police, Mr. V.K. Gupta, his name is also personally mentioned, and all other about 10 districts, and 11 districts extreme violence, and then about 7 districts there was moderate violence. So the propaganda which they carried out throughout India, that it was an uncontrollable violence. Even army cannot control it because the Hindu psyche was affected. So they reacted. This was quite suiting to their political agenda to prove that Hindu psyche was affected. That is why the violence has taken place. It was beyond the control of the state government, and naturally this has to be accepted as such, as a violence inevitable. That is the thing. So I submitted the first affidavit on 7th July 2002. That time, the Justice Nanavati Commission's period of coverage was up to 31st May. That was from the 27th February 2002 to 31st May 2002. So covering that, I have going to affidavit in which all reports I have sent to the government about the role of Sangh Parivar and the specific role of certain Sangh Parivar groups in specific areas, Ahmedabad and Baroda city, and some districts like Sabarkanda. Extreme violence was reported from Banaskanda, etc. These are all reported, and subsequently the government has extended the period of the commission up and extended it up to I'm standing correction because first period was up to April end. April 2002 end was the first period of coverage of the commission. I mean, next was period of coverage was extended up to 31st May of 2002. So I was asked to submit the second affidavit. Second affidavit, I have appended all the reports I have sent to the higher-ups about the role of the concerned persons, and also role of the political executive in conniving this thing. All this I have narrated in a detailed manner, in a graphic manner, and this has been submitted on the 6th September 2002 so probably because of the I should go slow and give favorable reports. In the second affidavit, there was a pressure on me, and I did not comply with. I have remained true to the foundational values and ethos of the Constitution of India. And this they did not like, and they transferred me to a unimportant no assignment post with no staff on 17th September 2002, and then I continued that post up to my superannuation on 28th February 2007. So then there were rumors that I may be superseded, even though I was not facing any departmental inquiry, anything. By February 2005, I was superseded. So, after the supersession, I have submitted my third affidavit, bringing it to the notice of the commission that I was superseded because I revealed the truth about the riots and the role of Sangh Parivar, etc. And I requested Justice Nanavati to take follow-up action so that the victimization or the persecution of myself by the government will not continue. But none of the commission did not even call me for a cross-examination checking this thing, whereas they have called me for cross-examination of my first affidavit that was submitted in July 2002. Then by September of 2005, the government has given a...
Shikmalji, we we might need to wrap up shortly.
Okay. So I will not narrate each affidavit, except I will tell you only mention one word about the one sentence about each of these affidavits. The fourth affidavit was necessitated by the fact that they have given us a charge sheet of 9 charges on the ground that I have recorded a briefing, illegal briefing imposed on me by the Home Secretary, Mr. Murmu, who later became presently probably he is the Controller and Auditor General, in which he said that don't speak anything at the government, we will go, we will harm you, etc. This is recorded also. They have given charge sheet on that ground, etc. And in that fourth affidavit, I mentioned about the revelations made by Mr. Chakravarti, as Mr. Chakravarti, the then DGP, was the person cited as a witness in charge sheet against me, and then the fifth affidavit was submitted sometime in 2006 about an information I received from the UP that UP police people are also witnessed the Sabarmati train burning incident, and that should be further enquired into, and no further action was taken. And sixth affidavit was about a suggestion I have made to Justice Nana of the Commission that the report sent by the army officers who have come here for assisting police should be available to the army headquarters, and also central paramilitary forces. Their report should be sent, and unless that's what I have submitted to the Justice Nana of the Commission. And seventh our was affidavit I have submitted in 2007. That is after my retirement, when Justice Nana of the directed me to bring out information, if at all available with me, about the misuse of secret resources fund by the higher ups, by the Chief Minister's office, etc. Then time was given. I have submitted that.
Thank you, Srikumarji. I think we might need to move on, but that was very enlightening.
Only one sentence. This thing I have submitted about 48 pages long statements given in 2-3 days. Justice to special investigation team, and also the last part is that having known that we so far failed to prosecute the people, the responsible organizers to perpetrators in criminal liability, for criminal action, I found out that there is a specific violation of the department regulations and the Justice Police Manual and police rules, which only created a situation of the offense. So I submitted a detailed representation to the then governor, and governor ordered a investigation on that and inquiry for instituting a department proceeding, but no follow-up action was not taken. This I asked a question through a MLA, and they have given a false information that no such direction was given by the governor, whereas the governor's copy of the governor's letters were available with me. This is long and short of this thing. Then I have given a lot of suggestions also.
Thank you.
Anything more you can ask? Probably.
No, thank you, Srikumarji. I think what you're really saying. Thanks again. Thanks for your.
I may request the readers to my book, which contains graphically this thing, Gujarat Behind the Curtain, revised edition, June 2021 of publications.
No, we'll definitely make sure that your thing is available. But thanks again. I think what you highlight is, I think where we are now is we start off with Tishaji laying out what she saw as a civil society activist and the horrors of the Gujarat pogrom, and Prem Shankaraji came in and he said even the starting of that was problematic because it wasn't he had issues with the burning and what started it, and then you have laid out the problems with law enforcement and how different people were treated differently, different community people were treated differently, and how it's actually affected your own life for not following the careerization, and just conforming to authority. And I think it's a nice time to segue into our next speaker, who who's seen that from a very close ringside, if you will, and how it's played out into her own personal life. And I might start by introducing and welcoming Dr. Akashi Bhatt, who is a practicing surgeon and a researcher at the University of Oxford. She is the daughter of Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, a former IPS officer, a whistleblower, a dissenter, but most importantly, a key witness to the state's complicit role and function in the Gujarat genocide. Dr. Akashi, over to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. So in an ideal world, it should have been my father, who is a key witness to the state's complicit role and function in orchestrating the genocide, sitting here in this panel today addressing all of you. But sadly, we do not live in an ideal world. We live in a world where systematic, orchestrated genocide goes unpunished for 20 years. We live in a world where justice for the victims of hate and violence is delayed and denied. We live in a world where the perpetrators of these heinous crimes continue to walk scot-free and grow in power, while the very defenders of social justice, of the victims of the Gujarat pogrom, continue to be systematically and vindictively witch-hunted, falsely framed, and incarcerated for having the unrelenting courage to continue fighting for justice for the victims of the Gujarat genocide. 2002 perhaps will be remembered for generations to come as the darkest hour in modern day India. 20 years ago, the targeted massacre of Muslims changed the lives of many. Tens and thousands of innocents who lost their lives, families which were scarred and destroyed, and brave souls who embarked on a long-drawn fight for justice for the victims of the state-orchestrated hate and violence. It wasn't just the state of Gujarat that burned 20 years ago. What burned along with it were the moral fibers, the secular thread, and the virtue of tolerance we had nurtured for generations. Overnight, the land of Gandhi turned into a laboratory of hate and violence, and we as a society kept watching in deafening silence. 2002 should have been an eye-opener. It should have jolted every breathing individual to their very core, but instead it resulted in everyone closing their eyes tight shut and blindly following a perversive bigot, letting our secular and sovereign nation being seeped into communal hate and divisive politics. The collective fear, apathy, and in some cases greed led to systematic and absolute subversion and saffronization of the very pillars of our democracy. The regime kept up an illusion of a democratic nation, whereas the reality is that democracy in our country has long eroded, leaving behind shells of once robust, honest, and independent institutions. Today, this draconian regime, hiding behind their subservient and subverted institutional bodies, continue to systematically target and incarcerate brave individuals who've had the courage to hold the regime accountable and who pose a threat of unmasking them in the public eye, bringing the political duo to justice for the heinous crimes committed by them in their lust of power. For the past 20 years, brave individuals have been diligently and courageously fighting for a greater cause, some of whom are part of the panel here today, some of whom, like the fearless Mrs. Jaffrey and the likes of her, who continue to seek justice for their loved ones, and some of whom, like my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, who languishes in jail today, paying the price for having the unwavering resolve and courage to continue fighting this draconian and vindictive regime ever since 2002, till present date, in pursuit of justice for the victims of the Gujarat genocide, all the while bearing the brunt of this fascist regime, fighting with his indomitable spirit, never doubling back, breaking, or bending in his resolve. For the past 20 years, my father has borne the brunt of having had the courage to stand up against this political duo. The easy thing in the face of all of this would have just been to resign from the services or to ask for deputation outside of Gujarat. Abandon the fight for justice, stating this wasn't our fight in the first place, The convenient thing would have been to bend to the whims of this draconian regime and follow other spineless individuals by faking amnesia and downright refusing to truthfully depose before the law in order to appease this fascist government. But did my father choose the easy or the convenient path? No, he did not. Instead, he remained unwavering in his resolve, fighting this often lonely battle. It is easy to flee from the battlefield when the fight gets real and ugly. However, it takes mettle, courage, and diligence of another order to remain standing in the battlefield, bloodied and bruised, fighting a long-drawn, unequal, and lonely battle. For over 2 decades, my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, has been vindictively victimized by this government for not buckling under political pressure and for daring to speak up the truth. The vindictive victimization of my father started in 2009 when he first started deposing before the SIT and escalated with his deposition before the Nanavati Mehta Commission and the subsequent submission of his affidavit in 2011 before the Supreme Court of India and before the National Commissions of Minority, implicating Narendra Modi, Amit Shah, and various other state functionaries in the 2002 state-engineered and launched terrorism against the Muslims. His affidavit also contained information about the assassination of Haren Pandya, as well as several extrajudicial killings and fake encounters in the state of Gujarat carried out in the name of protecting the then Chief Minister of Gujarat, the now Prime Minister of India. If it is not already apparent, the Gujarat model is that of intolerance. Either you are with the fascist regime or you are against them. Immediate reward or punishment. While the delinquent officers who aided and abetted this draconian regime in their heinous crimes continued to be rewarded by this regime, honest and diligent officers who stood up against the political duo continued to be vindictively victimized and made examples of. The immediate aftermath of having dared to speak up the truth witnessed my father's suspension and subsequent dismissal under the frivolous grounds of unauthorized absence from duty, an absence which was courtesy his legal obligation to appear and depose before the Nanavati Mehta Commission, a commission established to investigate the state's complicity in the 2002 Gujarat pogrom. My father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, was and is not just being punished by this fascist regime for implicating certain high-level state functionaries in their role in the 2002 Gujarat riots, but also for trying to bring into light the collusion between the SIT and the very state functionaries it was established to investigate. What we witnessed as a family since 2002 was the vindictive victimization and persecution of my father, escalating in 2009, 2011, which took a frightening and dangerous turn in 2018. If suspending him, dismissing him, unlawfully detaining him for having filed an affidavit, withdrawing our security, breaking down our home wasn't enough, the state, at the behest of the political duo, took away my father on 5th of September 2018 under the false pretext of questioning him in a 3-decade-old case with the sole purpose and intent to attempt to silence his voice once and for all. Judicial harassment has been used as an intimidation technique ever since. In an attempt to permanently silence and discredit the only person who can link Narendra Modi to the 2002 Gujarat pogrom, in a gross miscarriage of justice, my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, was maliciously and falsely framed in a 3-decade-old fabricated case and convicted to life imprisonment by conducting a blatantly vitiated trial by the lower sessions court in India for a crime he did not commit. There cannot be a more blatant example of vindictive persecution of a totally innocent man who did nothing but perform his duty in an outstanding and exemplary manner. My father's truth, integrity, and resolve pose such an undismissible threat to this fascist regime that all the power, force, and fear afforded by the offices held by this political duo and the fascist regime is being exercised to silence and discredit the voice of an honest and upright officer once and for all, to ensure that truth does not see the light of day. In the last 3 years, what we witnessed and what we continue to live is nothing short of a never-ending Kafkaesque nightmare. witnessing a complete desecration of due process, an absolute mockery of the once robust and independent judiciary. For over 3.5 years, we have been running from pillar to post to get one fair day in court. However, we live in a time where one fair day in court is a luxury not afforded to the honest and diligent by this fascist regime. We live in times where perpetrators of genocide, rapists, and killers walk scot-free on bail, while unprecedentedly, our petitions filed 3 years ago keep biting the dust in the registry year after year without seeing the light of day. The intention of this regime is to systematically destroy the credibility of my father so that Modi cannot be held accountable. But what will men with no character know what men like my father are made up of? It is 3 years, 5 months, and 14 days since my father was wrongfully incarcerated by this regime. Our pursuit for justice continues. The problem with this regime is that they think that they are undefeatable and that the defenders are breakable. Well, they are certainly not undefeatable. And one look at the likes of Mrs. Jaffrey, Ms. Setalwar, Mr. Shikumar, my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, is testimony to the fact that the defenders are certainly not breakable. But while these defenders have continued to hold the fort courageously for the past 2 decades, one cannot help but ponder how, somewhere, we failed as a society when we let these hate-mongering bigots and fascists rise to power, unquestioned and unaccountable. That we failed our country when we decided to remain silent in the wake of the screams of thousands of innocent lives slaughtered to the lust of power. That we failed our defenders when we as a society let examples being made of exemplary men and women who dared to stand up against this regime. That we failed as a society when we could not protect the very brave souls who kept fighting tooth and nail, even when the battle was long drawn and uneven. We failed the defenders when we could not stand up to defend them. Remembering the Gujarat pogrom once a year isn't a luxury we can afford, especially when our country is barely surviving on the tipping point, where the ruling regime will not even bat an eyelid before repeating 2002 to further their political ambition. We live in fragile and dangerous times where holding the regime accountable can get you shackled and thrown in jail, whereas lynching someone in broad daylight can make you an overnight hero of the Saffron Brigade. For the past 20 years, we failed to bring this regime to justice. I'm not saying that the regime was left completely unquestioned. A handful of brave men and women like Mrs. Jaffrey, my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, Ms. Setalwar have been and continue to fight against this regime at great personal and professional cost. But when the battle is against the entire machinery, against the deep-rooted, hardwired beliefs of hate and violence, collective peaceful action is the need of the hour to hold the regime accountable. To remind this regime that we haven't forgotten the flames of hate ignited in 2002 in Gujarat, that we haven't forgotten the cries of thousands of innocent lives lost, which continue to haunt the state, that we remember the sacrifices made by diligent and honest individuals, that we remember the sacrifices made by the likes of my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, and that we stand by them in support of the ones being incarcerated wrongly for having the courage to fight for justice, to remind them that they are not alone in this fight, and to promise them that we as citizens of a secular sovereign nation will not allow any power to be to pit brother against brother and engulf our nation in a fire of communal hate. We mourn today the loss of innocent lives. We mourn today our failure to protect the defenders, our failure to ensure justice for Mrs. Jaffrey and tens and thousands of others who have lost their loved ones to hate and violence, who continue to seek for justice and closure. But most of all, we should mourn our inaction, which has led this country to this dangerous precipice. When we as a society get too comfortable in our apathy, I would implore you to remember the thousands of innocent lives brutally massacred for one man's political ambition, to remember the thousands of victims of crimes against humanity who are scarred for life, living with little to no hope of ever seeing justice in their lifetime, to remember the likes of Justice Loya, Ms. Lankesh, and many more who lost their lives trying to do the right thing, while we watched as silent spectators. And remember my father, Mr. Sanjeev Bhatt, and the likes of him, who dedicated and continue to dedicate their life to fight for justice, but we failed to protect them. So when we get too comfortable in our inaction, think about the lives lost, the lives that could have been saved, and the brave lives wasting away. We do not have the luxury, nor can we afford to remember 2002 just once in a year. Rather, it should be living with us day in and day out till justice is delivered, till the perpetrators are held accountable and punished. Question is, will we gather here next year with a heavy heart, mourning the lives lost, or will our heart have some closure of justice having finally been delivered? This has been a long-drawn battle going on for 20 years, escalating dangerously with each passing year. But as my father would say, we will fight, we will resist, we will overcome, and that is certain. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bhatt. That was very powerful, and two very powerful messages. One, silence is complicity and nothing else. And you really, there's no other way of describing it. You either speak up or you are complicit in the crime. The first message. The second message, of course, is as you rightly say, all of us here, including myself, sit in the comfort of a different country. And do what we do, but we do that because of the inspiration that we get from people like your father, people like Mr. Tisaji, and also Prem Shankarji and Sheikh Marji. So there is hope, and with that, what we might do is I might just slightly we might go into the discussion, and with the permission, I might just play one more video from another Austrian senator who sends her a message of solidarity, and then we'll have a 10-minute discussion with questions, and then we'll wrap up. So going on to the video right now. So just to introduce this senator, her name is Lee Rhiannon. She's a parliamentarian, and she has consistently represented the wishes, values, and voices of the ordinary people in the Australian Parliament. She's well known for an energetic work in environment and social justice movements for over 5 decades. This is Senator Lee Rhiannon's statement of solidarity for Indian Muslims and other persecuted sections of the society. Just bear with me.
Hello, I'm joining you from Australia.
Sorry.
I wish to start.
I think I didn't do the right thing. Just bear with me. Share screen. Share sound. Yes, I didn't do the right thing.
By acknowledging the traditional owners of the land where I am, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay tribute to their history, their culture, and their ongoing struggles for justice, of which tragically there are so many. A huge thank you to the organisers of the India on the Brink conference. This event is so important. I think a key to stopping genocide in India is to recognise the responsibility of the international community to speak up, demand action, and to not stop until the fascist forces are exposed and defeated. This means recognising the power of our collective voice and collective actions to bring an end to the killings and the crimes against humanity that Muslims, Dalits, Christians, Sikhs, and other Indian minorities are being subjected to. Our job to build a strong global movement of condemnation of the BJP RSS forces is facing a major barrier. We can overcome this problem, but we do need to talk about it and confront it. The leadership of most Western countries are silent on the human rights abuses perpetrated by the Modi forces, and there is no recognition from any Western leader that India is on the brink of genocide. I do congratulate Gregory Stanton, founder and president of Genocide Watch, for the groundbreaking work he has done on this issue. Mr. Stanton has made the important point that genocide is not an event but a process. The way BJP and RSS-related groups spread hate and dangerous speech is part of this process that needs to be exposed and stopped. The Indian diaspora is being fractured due to these ugly tactics that break down social cohesion, promote distrust, and lead to violence. I would like to share with you an example of how this is playing out in Australia. Over the past few years, online abuse directed against Muslims, Sikhs, and anyone who challenges the Hindutva narrative has escalated. I've seen shocking, offensive comments on WhatsApp and Facebook groups. It must be so tough for those members of the Indian diaspora who read these ugly comments day after day. People are referred to as terrorists, vermin, and rapists. This verbal abuse has its roots in the Hindutva ideology. People are targeted either because they are not Hindus or because they are, but are critical of this dangerous and distorted offshoot of the Hindu religion. Abusive language, hate speech, dangerous speech, however we define it, it serves a destructive purpose. It effectively incites violence. This is one example of what happened to members of the Sikh community in Sydney. Members of that community were subjected to online abuse and violent attacks when they were organising public support for striking Indian farmers in 2020 and 2021. Police investigated a number of attacks on Sikhs and their temples in Australia. One young Indian, Vishal Jud, was charged with violent assault. A car was smashed up and young Sikhs were attacked. The perpetrator was jailed for 6 months and deported on release. It is informative to look at the response of the authorities in India and in Australia to this crime. In Australia, the police and political figures initially attempted to dismiss the attack as nothing more than a dispute between communities. This was the position of the police and a senior minister in the federal government. I don't believe the police would have investigated this case if the Sikh community had not collected the video footage of the shocking incident and handed it over to the police. Fortunately, there was one MP, a member of the New South Wales Parliament, who's also speaking here today, who condemned that attack. David Shoebridge is speaking at this conference. This incident in Sydney, Australia, seems like a world away from the 2002 attacks and killings of thousands of Muslims in Gujarat, the 2020 Delhi killings of Muslims, and the rising numbers of lynchings and harassment of Indian minority groups. But there is a link. Fascist forces in India are on the rise. Hate speech is breaking down social cohesion in the Indian diaspora. Violent attacks are escalating in frequency. People are being murdered. We must all speak out to stop genocide occurring in India. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Rhiannon. So with that, what I might do is go briefly into the questions. And the questions, interestingly, reflect what has been said here. And I think what has been said here is that we've always had hate and we've not been very good at dealing with it. We've been very often complicit because we just have chosen not to speak up. And there has been silence, when we say silence, and just not of individuals, but of the state, its political institutions, its judicial and law enforcement agencies have failed to act when they had to. And, they fail the people. And then going on to a higher level, we've had two politicians speak out here and call out the responsibility of the Australian government to say something, but that doesn't happen. There's so much reticence in calling it out for various reasons. And so I think the questions here are: the West appears to be silent on the ongoing violations of human rights. What would it take to get the West to walk the walk and prevent the violation of minority rights? Will it have to be a genocide? Dr. Stanton, do you feel up to taking that question? Is he there?
Well, I guess I should ask you to to direct it also to other people who are on this panel.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, yes.
You know, I think that really what we've learned in this anti-genocide movement is the importance of solidarity around the world to get our leaders to really pay attention, to speak out. And what we have you've just shown is how leaders in Australia are quite aware of this problem. And we've got people here in the United States, as you know, who are as well. One of our speakers, in fact, today, or I think maybe she's speaking tomorrow, is coming from the Commission on International Religious Freedom, which is a bipartisan commission that is appointed by both parties in the United States. It is funded by the federal government, and in fact is, truly outspoken on this issue. They have issued reports about the danger of genocidal violence in India, and they have the ear of a lot of people in Congress and in our governments. So I think that is one of the key things, is to utilize civil society organizations like the ones that are represented here to bring the attention of our leaders to these issues. That is what this conference, of course, is all about. And so I would just then ask others perhaps on this panel.
Absolutely. Thank you, Professor Stanton. I think I might direct that question to Tista, if I may, and then probably to Prem Shankar Jazi, and finally some insights from Akashi. So over to you, Tista ji.
Thank you so much. And I'd just like to say that every efforts to build up a solidarity and deeper understanding of what is happening in India on a consistent basis is very, very crucial. I remain a little pragmatic, quote, skeptical, because we've experienced as activists that while the human rights concerns that we keep talking about within India should be of paramount concern when it comes to any country in the world, including any other, the rest, our neighbors anywhere, the fact that India is a large market for goods and companies tends to override some of these concerns when it comes to international diplomacy. And I say this quite brutally, because it's not as if some of us don't try and within the bounds of what is proper and what is channelized and possible, we keep communicating to our compatriots, other activist organizations, international organizations. Just as we raise issues about those countries, we raise issues about ours. But I think the real issue here always is a problem that how far are the quote unquote powers willing to go?
Thank you, Tista ji. Your insights, Prem Shankar Jaji. You're mute. You're on mute again.
I know, yes, I got, okay. Well, before I even start, may I say that I feel privileged to have heard you, Akashi. I have been following your father's case very carefully, very, very carefully. And I have not written, which I will also be coming out with. But I just, please give him on my behalf, my admiration and whatever strength you can give him, saying that there are thousands, tens of thousands of us. I just don't mean the ordinary people in the intelligentsia who have not forgotten him and not forgotten what he's done. Now, very briefly coming back to what you said, I have one request. You know, I would ask all of you, those of you who are not Indian, or Australians or Americans, please urge your governments to say something to our government. This is done better on a government-to-government basis. You know, on a public basis, when if you speak out on the public platform, all it does is it hardens the support of for precisely the people who you want to influence. I mean, this happened over and over again. I remember about 10, 15 years ago when there was a lot of condemnation. This is the pre-Rohingya, way back 15 years, 20 years ago. where there was a lot of condemnation of the Burmese military government. We India were asked to join in that, and we refused. But we did have an ambassador who was in touch with both Aung San Suu Kyi and also the younger elements in the Burmese military, and who played a very important role in eventually bringing around a situation where a form of democracy would come back into being. Limited democracy could be brought back in Burma. But I'm afraid that may not work with someone like Prime Minister Modi. He's a different kind of person, but it is worth trying. I think that words are easy to say, actions are far more important, and I beg of you, take action.
Thank you, Mr. Jha. Akashi, your thoughts? We'll have to wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes. So after your answer, there was another question, but I've been asked to wrap up in 5 to 10 minutes. So after your answer, we will wrap up.
Just
yeah. You're on mute.
Sorry. Just resonating what Ms. Setalvad and Mr. Jha said, that wider course of actions, there are twofolds. One is to hold this government questionable on a much more wider scale, on a much more global scale. When governments of neighboring countries, they question what the government is up to, or when they hold them accountable, then it somehow unmasks the false narrative that this regime, this government is trying to propagate all across the world, that we are a robust democracy, that nothing is wrong within the country. And second is for the people to realize, because what has been happening for a very long time is that the fear has percolated so deep in each and every mind of the individual that they feel that you cannot raise your voice against this government. The fear is self-inflicted. And the moment people in the country realize that they were the one who gave this government power enough to preside over them, and that they are also the ones who can take that power back from them, that is when a change will occur. So people should stop fearing what this regime can do to them, and they should collectively stand up and question them whenever any atrocity takes place, not just for themselves, but whenever any atrocity takes place at any point in time in any corner of the country.
Thank you, Akashi. So I might end with so to summarize it, yes, we've had struggles. One big problem is silence and the ineffectiveness of our legal, political, and judicial institutions. The way forward is not to be silent and speak up. So I'll try and end with a positive note, saying that the parliamentarians have gone beyond just video statements. There's been one particular parliamentarian who has committed to organizing a similar session that speaks to your thing about, are we going to meet again? The answer is yes. And he's actually committed to promoting such a session through his particular parliament. And we will announce that we will play his video towards the end of the third day, because it'll be appropriate then. So please continue to follow us. So it's not all dark, and there are people who are speaking up, and there are parliaments who are happy to host us. So that's a long way from where we were before. So with that, I must thank. Sorry.
Yeah, Haru sir, there are a few questions because of lack of time. We couldn't address them. I just saw them in the question panel. I fully understand the problem the organizers are facing. If you could just share some of our emails with the participants, we are happy to answer them one-to-one. And if you could just share them as organizers, because it's not fair to take up time, but we'd be happy, I think, to engage with the questions. My email is very simple. It's teesta@gmail.com. TWESTAs, lowercase, twice, teesta@gmail.com. Just for the participants.
That's really kind of you, Teesta ji. So with that, let me thank the esteemed panel: Prem Shankar ji, Teesta ji, Akashi, Shrikumar ji, and Professor Stanton. It's been a pleasure having all of you, and I've certainly learned a lot. And I think we can say that the way forward is better than what it was, and we've learned, and we can be better people and fight this more effectively. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thanks.